Welcome everyone to our first webinar about the book Designing Sustainable Futures. I'm so excited to welcome you and three world-renowned experts to have a conversation about how might we begin designing more sustainable futures. There's been a lot of talk about the importance of sustainability, the realities of climate change, the underlying systemic challenges of economic conditions, and certainly the political climate, which is changing every day. So our intention with this series, beginning with the first part of the book, Anticipating Better Futures, will then be followed up by a second webinar in a few weeks, which will focus on part 2 of the book, Creating Experiences that are more sustainable, products and services and systems that are more sustainable to help bring that better future closer to the present. And then a few weeks later, we will have a third webinar looking at the third part of the book, Leading the Transition. We know that we can design more sustainable futures, but if we don't bring people together to make some of the challenging choices, to change the way that we consume and produce, and also the stories that we tell each other, then we will not be able to design more sustainable futures. So for today's session, I'm really excited and honored to have three friends, colleagues, and individuals who I have learned an incredible amount from over the last few years. So first and foremost, Soai Inyatula, who many of you are probably aware of. He's the UNESCO Chair in Future Studies. He has pioneered causal layered analysis, CLA, and has been an inspiration for many of us, all of us applied foresight practitioners, with an aim of getting at some of the underlying root causes of the challenges that we see today. I'm also honored to have, again, a very, very dear friend, Lisa K. Solomon. She is a futurist in residence at Stanford University, has done amazing work applying futures in the space of civic change. And I'm looking forward for her to share some of the experiences, particularly recently, with civic futures. And then next to me in our office here at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies is Lasse Johansen. He is the Chief Foresight Officer here at Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and again has experience working for-profit, non-profit, in international environments to bring strategic foresight to help leaders across the globe have more anticipatory skills and developing anticipatory leadership, which I think we all know is critical for us to be able to design more sustainable futures. So as I mentioned, we're going to be having a conversation about part 1, but the conversation is probably going to go in a number of different directions. Part 1 of the book begins in chapter 1, where we look at how can we embody foresight? How can we make foresight more experiential? We know that there are many tools and methods out there, but how can we actually encourage stakeholders to truly experience the future? Part 2 of the book is, well, if we have a more experienced future, but let's make it more provocative. Let's be more speculative in asking some of the critical questions about how do we anticipate a better future. Part 3 of the book is all about using AI. Now, we are all probably going to learn about how we use AI by sharing some of our ongoing experiences. And I'm expecting that we're all going to be bringing in some of the experiments, I think probably a good way to describe it, of how we're using Gen AI to achieve those two objectives, to be able to imagine a future through embodiment and to use AI to be speculative, provocative, and critical about those futures. So with that, I would love to have the opportunity to hear, Sohai, given your vast experience, your reflections, your insights, a story or two, how have you seen Foresight be more embodied, more experienced, which ideally makes more engagement throughout a transition process?
Thanks, Joseph. Great to be here. Nice to meet you, Lisa Kay. Um, I started doing futures in 1975 when I was a student of Jim Dater, and he led this Hawaii 2000 project in the late 60s. And I think since, and then the first project I did with them was a kind of a foresight workshop. It was very clear traditional scholarship was about the lecture, going back at least to the 15th century, but also the 10th century. It was the clergy person's lecture, giving information with the assumption that more information would lead to social change. It's very clear from critical theory the last 20, 30 years, that's not the case. More information does not lead to better policy because people, as environmentalists argue, are engaged in futures fallacies. So by the 80s, we were engaging in how do we get groups to do experiential futures, not just giving a lecture, but put them in situations where they themselves go through a transformation. And so then in the 90s and then the last 25 years, I've been using the CLA game, the SARCAR game, and different ways in workshop settings to have people experience change. Mostly what I do as part of the other projects is inner CLA. So it's not just about how do we see externalities changing, but how do I change my story and thus see the future differently. So really it starts 50, 60 years ago, and Foresight going from very much forecasting to kind of the scenario stuff they were doing, to then really going to external transformation using narrative and then personal transformation. But I would say the last 50, 60 years has been throughout experiential futures. It's built in. It can't just be a cognitive, I will give a lecture, people will change. We know that doesn't work. People double down on what they don't know. So it's a personal transformation as part of it, and finding within people's work what stories we have to tell to help them create, well, perceive and then create a new future. So I'll stop there. I can give more examples, but that's kind of the framework is how I see foresight in futures.
It's interesting. So I didn't even make the connection between CLA and the embodied futures. And I want to give a shout out to colleagues of mine, Stuart Candy and Jake Dunnigan from the Institute of the Future. And I know that you've worked with them over the years. If I may, just to push what is preventing us, certainly in the last 10 years, of converting those embodied futures, the experience of foresight, into concrete action, in this case, specifically for helping accelerate more sustainable practices and changes.
Asking me or Lisa or?
So I know I was asking you, and then
So I'll
I'll
give
come
you
to Lisa.
yeah. So examples. I know I was working for United Nations organization just last year, and we were looking. Part of our work was futures of the UN, future of UN Security Council. And then when I asked participants, these are senior directors, what is the narrative of the current UN? And they said, well, we feel like we're referees with a small whistle. And they were speaking about, as officers in the UN, as leaders, they're sitting and watching a genocide in one part of the world and taking over a different country in another part of the world. The feeling of helplessness. So then when we do the CLA process, foresight process, the first thing we ask them, what's a better story for you? So let's not go with the big picture. How do we transform this planet? Specifically for you, what can you do differently? And they were very clear. Okay, so how do I change my story? No one wants to be a referee with a small whistle. So then as we workshop this, we start to look at what are different possibilities. One is the technical question, what forecasting does, right? Which is let's just get a bigger whistle. And so that's the technical response to a deep systemic structural issue. Then I ask more people, some people say, well, we need more Mandelas. We need people who embody the spiritual, compassionate, visionary world beyond racism, beyond all the isms. Then a third group said, actually, we just need to buy the football pitch, meaning the future of the UN is essentially far more corporatization. So by framing it as what's the story that's preventing us to change, that allows new stories to come in. Now the foresight process was fantastic. Then you embody them. We'd run a CLA workshop, a Sarkar game workshop. We have people using props and tools, and that gets them to experience something else personally. And so the normal thing is, well, the UN Security Council, let's just increase the number of countries that have veto power, right? So that's strategic foresight. If the world's changing, more people want in, let's just increase the numbers. That's option one. Option two is, well, why is eligibility of being in the UN based on nation state status? So that becomes far more interesting. So then the Security Council changes not by adding more nations in, but by changing who's allowed to be in. Why can't citizens? One person, one vote. If we want global democracy, one person, one vote, then you game that. Two, well, let's just allow corporations in. The workshop I ran with Interpol last week was, okay, given the rise of the Amazons of tech, we can easily imagine the loss of public policing towards private policing and the end of democracy as we know it. So policing said, let's hold the line. So scenario two is techs come in and part of the Security Council. You can go further. Well, why isn't nature allowed? Why isn't Gaia itself allowed? Why aren't children allowed? So foresight works best by saying, here's the problem. Our conventional way of seeing it is limited. Let's keep on expanding it. Now, one delegation said, okay, that's all fantastic, but what's plausible? And the plausible thing, I think, was quite good. We go in the future, we come back. Plausibility was very clear. Well, how about we limit the number of vetoes you can use per year? So US, we know, vetoes almost everything that's progressive these days. Russia does too. China does too. Let's just limit vetoes to 10. So you get 10 vetoes a year. You can use them on what you want. So this prioritizes what's possible in a changing world. So futures foresight starts to do that. So the issue in terms of sustainability, those who pollute will only change if they feel the impact of their pollution. Those who have power in the Security Council that defines who lives and dies on this planet will only change if they're confronted with the results of their actions. They don't experience them either cognitively or materially embodied, thus they don't change. So our work as futurists is always saying, here's X. X is no longer working. It worked in the 1940s. It doesn't in 2025. What are the alternative scenarios? And what are the core metaphors that prevent us from changing? And how then do we create a process of transformation where change is not just more likely, but inevitable?
Well, it's a wonderful example of how speculating is really reframing the problem and coming up with a more innovative solution, like having a limited number of vetoes is a way for us to take that experience of the future and make the foresight more tangible to move towards a solution that, as you said, is much more adapted to today's challenges. Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you primarily because Sohai has mentioned referees, whistles, and voting, a couple of areas that I know you've been focusing on in your work, particularly this past year.
Yeah, past few years. Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and huge congratulations, Joseph, on yet another book that is advancing the field of futures and strategic foresight. I continue to be humbled by how prolific and passionate you are about helping more people feel agency and learn the skills and disciplines of imagining and anticipating the future, and learning what we can do to bring that future, those preferred futures, to life. And so I've been following your work for a long time, of course, and thank you so much. And really appreciate all that the Copenhagen Institute for the Future is doing to make more tools available, which is really what gets me up every day. I've been doing strategic foresight for almost 25 years now. I stumbled into it after the first internet crash, where I wondered, why were companies that were so bullish on the future all of a sudden in retreat in late 99, and in particular, why did they make choices that really did not serve the humans that they were so excited to support before the market crashed? And long story, that just led me to a wonderful community called Global Business Network, where I discovered that the idea of helping leaders think in critical and creative ways about the future was a discipline we could all learn. And that was life changing for me. And that's been the path I've been on for a long time. And I just want to fast forward to the work I've been doing for the last almost 7 years at the Stanford D School, or technically the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design, that has been around for 20 years, that is focused on helping leaders and learners develop their creative problem solving skills in nonlinear ways. And for those that are listening, and Joseph, I know you are, in addition to a strategic foresight expert, a deep devotee to design and bringing design in the world, my work there bridges both. And so, just making some quick connections, if strategic foresight allows us to imagine new futures in a variety of methods, including CLA that was just discussed, scenarios, and a number of different methods that seem to be proliferating every day, which is wonderful. Design helps remind us that it is about the humans that we need to support in that process. And that starts with empathy. And empathy will tell us that most people do not feel comfortable imagining the future because they've never been taught how to imagine the future. Now, the good news is I believe when we're born and in our earliest years of being on this planet, we are imaginative beyond belief. And then unfortunately, most of us hit some form of formal education. And I think by the time we're 9 or 10 years old, we're taught that the quantitative methods of thinking about problems are more valuable than the qualitative methods of thinking about problems. I have yet to see an AP course in dreaming, in visioning, in asking bold questions. And yet, that's exactly what we need to solve some of our most difficult problems. So, my work at Stanford and working with these students, and my work with leaders around the world, is to help them infuse these practices in ways that meet them where they are, that acknowledge that it's very difficult to be a master at something we've never had time to practice. We cannot expect people to know how to do this when the crisis hits. We have to start much, much earlier in helping them develop comfort with ambiguity, holding tensions at the same time, imagining alternative futures without feeling like they need to solve it or that they're responsible for it, and to understand that in these multiple years of polycrises, our nervous systems are overwhelmed. So we need a whole lot more empathy in the practice and conversation of futures in and of itself. And that's very much what I'm focused on doing. And you asked briefly about civic futures, and we could talk more about that. For the last 5 years, I've been trying to use the practices of design and futures almost as a Trojan horse to help more young people and more community leaders feel a wider sense of agency in having an impact in shaping the kinds of futures that they want to be a part of. To make that very concrete, and for a number of reasons of a backstory we don't need to get into here, I have been partnering with college coaches and college athletes to help them take the skills that they have been learning as teammates and as performers in their sport to be better citizens on their campus. Why? Because thinking like a futurist, we need to understand where our eyeballs are already. They're already coming to sports games. And if we can help these athletes talk about the importance of getting involved and being a good teammate and being a good citizen, and using the media that's already around them, using new incentive systems to get them to understand that when they find purpose beyond their sport, as an example, they are healthier, they're more successful. These are futures that they can make a bet on while they are lifting all boats. Again, there's a lot to say about how we've done the technical components of meeting them where they are. But the point is that we've combined both the design and futures practices in ways that get them excited to do the work. So maybe I'll pause there, Joseph. You know I get very passionate about this. But my point is, again, is that we need to use these practices together in order to make sure that we're having the impact that we want. And I know just the last thing I'll say on this is that doing that well is about creating experiences that move people emotionally, not just intellectually. And I've written a book on designing strategic conversations where the entire part is to help more leaders learn how to think about the conversations they are having about their highest impact. Most uncertain elements are felt experiences, not meetings to be managed. And as we say in the opening chapter of the book, that's probably the most important leadership skill we've never been taught. But the good news is we can learn it.
So quick shout out. It's a wonderful book Lisa Kay wrote a couple of years ago. Very, very relevant today. Anyone who is interested in structuring better conversations and facilitating them with a level of intelligence that I'm still very, very admiring the way that you formulated that. I do, Lisa Kay, I want to push, if in your experience, bringing the future to where people are is a way for them to embody it, to feel it. What in your experience has prevented that closeness of the future to action today?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and I love that you keep pressing on it. I think the most important thing, like I said earlier, is we've not been taught how to do it. I mean, sometimes the simplest answer is right in front of us. And my approach has been to get people to experience it quickly in fun and joyful and playful ways that reduce that stress, that reduce the need for us to lead with status or lead with an imposter syndrome, and then to slowly at the end of them saying, you can do this too. Let me give you another example. Just this past year at Stanford, I hosted a gathering called The Future's Happening, Democracy Edition. And I really encourage everybody to take a look, Google it, futures-happening. Hopefully maybe you can put it in the show notes.com. And it was focused on imagining brighter democracies. And again, well, I don't think it's any secret to anybody in the world that we are suffering from a crisis right now in democracies globally, and particularly here in the United States. And there's a lot of important energy that's been going around to try to repair, to try to defend. I personally, as a futurist, didn't see enough people asking, what if it goes right? What if we imagine better democracies that we want to be a part of? So we had an experiment where we brought about 100 what I call democracy makers, movers, and multipliers together at the D School at Stanford to ask, what is our best version? What if we built upon bright spots of democracy? Now, you can imagine, to your point, Joseph, about it being experiential or embodied, every design choice I made in order to gather people had to be aligned with why we were gathering at a makerspace within Stanford and not at, say, the Hoover Institute or the Political Science Hub. So everything was about helping people from the very beginning feel like they were invited to have a different conversation, that they were invited to be imaginative in a credible way. So one of the most important things we did in partnership with a wonderful, wonderful creative strategy firm called Creatives, led by Franzi Sessler, is we created 25 bright spot posters, each of which started with a question about the future that was intentionally worded to be engaging. What if we imagined professional athletes to be rewarded for their civic engagement as much as winning? What if we used art as a mechanism for having civic renewal? What if we allowed pizza to be a gateway to bringing people together, to have dinners around conversations relative to their civic futures? Each one was not meant to have a single answer, but to invoke curiosity. And then anticipating that, of course, some folks feeling beat up by the system might say, well, that would never happen, because we celebrated an existing organization or initiative that were doing it already in a positive way with a QR code to help them learn more. And so the idea was, by circulating in concrete and tangible ways all of these bright spots, we might help advance some new ideas that might overcome let's call it the cynicism at worst, or the fear that we are not capable of it. At every step, we seeded, yes, we are. Yes, we are. And additionally, the last thing I want to say about this, the goal was not to get people to start something brand new, but to build on things that were already happening. To say we're not at zero here on our pathway to building better civic futures. We're at 3, we're at 4, we're at 5. Go meet someone, build on it. And what happened after that gathering, just 24 hours, has been magical. Tens of thousands of people have been touched by new initiatives. For example, we had someone there from a public libraries from around the country, Shemichael Hallman. He's the director of civic health for the Urban Libraries Council. He hosted a day on civic health and imagination for over 200 librarians around the country on how to use a place within local communities that were already the most trusted source to further civic health. We had another incredible educator that created new curricula based on a wonderful group called Warm Cookies of the Revolution that was doing civic engagement through the lens of design to create a new contest to how to get kindergartners feeling like they had agency in their local communities. I could go on and on. The point is, when you design things to engage people from their core of hope and possibility, and you allow yourself to dial down the intellectual rigor, well, let's say you're not dialing down the intellectual rigor, you're dialing down the start of which you are making those early seeds accessible with it backed by some logical framework, but you're not leading with that. You're leading with the humanity.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear how designing those experiences to truly feel and emotionally connect with the future has inspired the design of those more sustainable experiences, those more sustainable places, and really motivated leaders. So it's a good example of we are able to train, we are able to develop, we are able to overcome whatever we had when we were younger and was lost because of institutionalized education. With that, Lasse, I'd like to turn to you to hear about your experiences in the last couple of years examining and developing leaders with more anticipation, to be able to anticipate. And Manuela and I, when we were putting together the book proposal, we were debating, do we use the word imagine? Do we use the word anticipate? And we ended up landing on both. But I'd love to hear about this emerging trend that leaders want to anticipate the future. They want to get in front of it. And are they able to learn that?
Yeah, I think wonderful question and a wonderful background to speak on, both with Lisa and Sohail's comments. I think it's really the positive thing about this is definitely that we see an increasing ask for embracing futures thinking in organizations in general. What we also experience is what you have spoken to, that you know the current structures and incentive systems in most organizations are not based on speaking about inspirational futures and opportunities that are emerging in the long term. It's more focused on not being wrong than sometimes being right. And I think when people are taught in these systems, and the ones that are floating to the top, they are very good at navigating these systems. So they have been taught something else. So I think that is that's the challenge. The good thing is that very often it's also smart people, and they realize that there is a need for thinking in different ways. But as you both spoke to, Sohail and Lisa, it's deeply innate thinking mechanisms that you need to change. And if you start speaking with a language that is too far away from their everyday, they stop listening. so my experience is that it's really about using their language to begin with, and slowly moving to something more inspirational, and immersing them into these potential futures. And then through that, allow them to, for example, through the CLA, understand what are their metaphors, how can they start changing that, but also just, I mean, I actually think it's quite simple. What you feed is also what is growing here. So when you start exposing them to futures that are using their language, using data, using reasoning, and say these futures they're standing in front of you, and this could happen. So how will you react to that? Then they start actually putting themselves into that future, and that ignites some thinking that is taking them a little bit outside of their body, outside of their organization, and seeing the world from the outside in. And I think just that exercise in itself is actually helping us to move towards, better futures. Of course, you can use that thinking also to just optimize for your own conditions, but long-term thinking in, I would say, almost any cases is more based on, making the cake bigger than cutting the cake so it suits your circumstance.
And you're seeing more willingness to enlarge the cake. Is anticipation and anticipating futures, having more emotional foresight, helping leaders, in large organizations to see the cake a little bit bigger?
I do think that one of the most common topics when we speak about the future is necessity to develop partnerships. So I think there's something in it, and I'm sure Lisa and Sohail would have some perspectives on that. I'm sure there are some perspectives about the future that is infusing some more, I would say, collaborative approaches into your mindset, because it appears that it's less about just extracting what you have in the future. It's more about building building something and using what you have and building relationships, partnerships, and also I do think that the long-term thinking, that's where the perspectives of doing an impact also plays a larger role compared to the profit. It's still in companies, profit is obviously still a thing, but it's not just for the profit.
So there's a profit and purpose balance that when you go into the future, you're able to try to find a better balance?
I do think that you more clearly see that these two elements are synergetic. Right. In the long term, whereas you have a tendency to see they're opposing each other in the now.
Okay. And I'm going to go over to, you speak a lot about futures theater. And I'd like to be a bit provocative to get your take on the opportunity that we have. I think, Lasse, you've done a great job of explaining the opportunity for us to apply futures, apply strategic foresight, to be able to make this more experiential, to be more provocative, particularly in large organizations. But then on the other side, there is a risk. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how do we as practitioners, maybe not, we might not be able to avoid the risk, but how do we find the right balance, and what are some of the choices that we can make about designing those experiences for more embodied foresight so that we don't fall into the trap of futures theater.
So the one thing is you want to get people in a safe space. If now you're asking within a setting where you're running a practice, a workshop, or a process, so the safety is critical. Once you're there, you can start to have some type of transformation. I know I won't go into details because this is public. One group, they wanted quantitative information on a number of indigenous nurses. And so there was a whole process how to figure out scenarios on forecasting, strategic foresight. But once we started to move from the litany, here's the data, to transformation, and the CLA game, we were trying to role play the view of the surgeon, the view of the nurses, the view of admin people. And then indigenous view quickly went, yes, but we don't see hospitals as safe spaces. And then they said, well, why? Well, you're saying more hospitals or better designed hospitals or green hospitals, but still the way you design the hospitals never includes the indigenous voice. And so, for example, that meant when you have guest visiting hours, the guest is one person. We live and work as communities. So the hospital design in itself leads to illness in that sense. So when I was working with the African Global Brain Network, we were looking at the science of the brain, the future of the brain, but the critical part that was novel for me, they said, well, African ways of knowing are brain protective. They're not based on science per se, but they're stories we got from our parents and ancestors, which help us think about those stories make the brain protective. So losing those stories is a way that ensures brain damage. Now back to the indigenous workshop, when we were doing the CLA, first it went to the hospital safety, but then one of the persons who was not even in the game, in the audience, runs up to the stage and says, I'm indigenous and I'm the prime minister of the country. And everyone started clapping. Because everyone felt at that moment the issue was not foresight. The issue was definitely not strategic foresight. The issue was people embodying how they felt about the future and moving towards transformation. And that changed the entire meeting. And so the difference, I think, is maybe a semantic difference, but for me, strategic foresight continues the mistake of empire and colonization. So I don't do strategic foresight. The strategic foresight means generally, I know you folks aren't that way, but many people who do strategic foresight, it's strategy, which always assumes the story of the chess set. I have more cake, you have less. What you folks have been saying is, no, we want to transform and create the impossible today, to change the parameters. So that, for me, is a different type of futures, asking the impossible question, enlarging the cake, even asking, why are we eating cake? Shouldn't, cake always has eggs. What about pies? What about some, different ways to think about this? So transformative futures in that sense is safer because I start with my story. So straight away, when you work with groups, especially outside of empire, people tell their story first. So I remember when you had Shakil last week, one of my most profound experiences when I was working in Bangladesh, and you can ask Shakil about that. I was running a 2-day project on the future of the university. And the dean of the university, because I'm born in Pakistan, had already decided that they were going to have a boycott after 1 hour and everyone leave. The minute the workshop started, instead of going to strategy or scenarios or foresight, I just stood up and I felt straight away something was wrong. I said, something's wrong in the room, and I knew it, but I didn't know what. So I said, by the way, I want to apologize for the genocide against Bangladesh. And then the entire day was fantastic. And the dean came up to me, he said, yeah, if you hadn't said that, we were going to walk out and leave the room empty. So the embodied part is being clear about each one of our stories. Once we're clear about that, then we co-design based on the narrative, and it develops a shared narrative. Otherwise, more often than not, it's merely asking the other provide data to have the core expand its value. So this is very different. Again, we feed what grows, but then as futurists, we're asked to show up when something's not growing. With Lisa Kay's fantastic example, I was working with one Olympic team, and they're gold medalists. I said, okay, so I said, why do you want to spend 4 days with us? You already win number 3 in the world in terms of gold medals in swimming. So what use would you have to spend time with us? We have no idea how you to be better swimmers. They said, we know something's wrong. So we could have gone with scenarios about what's wrong, but we said, okay, tell me the story right now. They said, we focus billions on the golden second. Maybe not billions, maybe hundreds of millions. I don't remember the data exactly. On the golden second, meaning the entire race comes down to 1 second. It's 4 years of training for 1 second. I said, well, what's wrong with that? You're winning. He goes, but after the pool, our swimmers become drug addicts, spouse abusers, alcoholics. And so he said, I'm obviously giving them the worldview that competition is over everyone. And so they leave the pool, again, as Lisa Kay said, and they have a worldview that no longer works. We're not growing the future. And so then I said, what's the better story? He said, golden life. Meaning it's not just about how fast you swim, it's your moral imperative, your spiritual life, financial literacy. And so our work is really entering spaces, having experimental workshops, ways of knowing whether it's, and getting people safe, and then finding a way to have that transformation. But that starts, I think, with all of us. So getting clear about what our story in every space is. Otherwise, if I'm unconscious, then I'll just get what they said they wanted, which is really what they wanted.
Which is really the theater. And I think that's a wonderful imperative for all of us to be in touch with who we are and go into that space to be open and transparent, and really to role model the kind of authenticity and transparency and demonstrate the safety of the space that we and obviously stakeholders who we're working with need to cultivate. And if safety and safe space is critical for these speculative conversations, which are more provocative, which are more transformative, Lisa Kay, I'm curious, with that in mind and your work in civics and across the board, our definition of sustainability is the 17 SDGs. So it's not just about climate, it's much broader than that. What are your views on the ways to increase the safety of sustainable future conversations and interventions?
Well, I just want to just echo everything Sohai just said just there around the importance of having, these are my words, listening to that, deep care for the people that you're working with, right? Safety comes from honest care. It also comes from humility, that you're going in there to be in service of who they are and to help whoever you are working with have a better life, feel more capable, build new skills for this moment. And that's, of course, connected to responsibility, a sense of responsibility. And those are often, and I'm going to say this, Joseph, I know you're not afraid of provocative statements. So forgive me if I'm going too far here. Those are often not found in a playbook, in a toolkit, in a single workshop, right? Those are it's an approach to supporting these conversations and this work in a way that is embodied in if you are fortunate enough to be invited to help design and facilitate these kinds of conversations about better futures, that is just it's a huge responsibility to be thinking about. And it asks that you do a deep amount of work ahead of time. I think Lassie talked about the importance of language, talking about the importance of listening, talking about the importance of really understanding the dynamics that may show up in that conversation that preceded weeks, years, decades, even longer than that. That you are there to support, hopefully, an evolution, a change, maybe a transformation, but that's a big ask, right? You are there to support turning towards a different posture towards the future that is more agenic, that is more resilient, that allows people to build their own sense of possibility and capability. And that's just a much bigger ask than, hey, can we come up with some 5 new ideas that might be, feel good in the moment. So that requires that people that are at the center of this work have some background in psychology, in emotional intelligence, in design, in these disciplines that I think are not yet intertwined in the way that they need to be. So this is a bit of a tangent in asking your direct question, Joseph, which is, I guess, fundamentally to understand that when you are given a great responsibility and opportunity to invite people to have different conversations about what sustainable futures means, first and foremost, I believe that you need to understand that you are holding their hearts, you're holding their fears, you're holding their hopes, and to do that in a very um, tender way, that where you show up authentically, and to say, not only are we here to help explore using disciplines of anticipation, using applied imagination, fundamentally, we're here to support each other in this and to recognize we all may be coming in from a very, very different place on that. And so I think that that's what it requires, right? That I think Sohai was saying that we ourselves model a sense of authenticity about what this kind of work and approach can do and what it can't do. And so I really hope, and I'm in the process right now of writing an article about where I think we are in some of this proliferation of strategic foresight and futures toolkits. It's wonderful and it's incomplete. And so the article I'm working on right now is a bit of a take on the very famous Soil and Green movie, sci-fi movie, right? Like it's about people, right? We have to honor that there are people at the center of this work, and that means that it may go a little slower. And so I really want to encourage people to really think about their work as helping everyone that we have the opportunity, whether it's in our classes, in our conversations, to help them learn forward, right? To help them develop their own beliefs for themselves, that we are capable of imagining futures that we are also capable of building. And so if we go too far too fast, then we just contribute to, I think, the broken trust that is so pervasive in this moment. And so it's really just an opportunity to every step saying, I am going to be responsible. I'm going to hold your heart. I am going to help um, build this with you, right? For you. Together, we are going to be in this to do. And notice, like, I'm saying a lot of words that don't necessarily immediately show up in a bottom line. And so that's a tension that we need to balance. And I'll just maybe close this answer with returning to Moments of Impact, the book. We have a chapter, getting back, Joseph, to your earlier question about what makes this work hard. We have a chapter in the back called Overcoming the Yeah Buts, as in, yeah, but that would never happen here. And there are three core patterns in that I think are really apt today as they were when we wrote them years ago. One is most organizations are wired for short-term incentives, KPIs and one-year plans. Those are important, right? But they are incomplete. They don't support that long-term thinking that I was talking about. So short-termism. The other is that as human beings, we tend to protect what we have, right? So politics gets in the way. And here, calling in from the US, I'm not talking about Democrat and Republican. I'm talking about the very natural tension within organizations around my budget, my people, my initiative versus that higher purpose that was talked about earlier. And the third, like I said before, is that we've never been taught how to do this. So we have these almost three-headed horsemen that when you get an adaptive challenge coming in, like how do we build sustainable futures that are complex and layered, it bumps up against those three elements: short-term thinking, capability gaps, politics, and it kind of goes nowhere to die. And that's maybe where we get the theater. Well, we'll just have a workshop. We'll feel better. But there's nothing that really emerges from that. But instead, if we have leaders, and this gets back to what Lasse was talking about and the importance of this work as leadership work, leaders who can frame it with a longer term purpose, that understand that we need to get the best out of the diverse perspectives, right? So that's politics not as getting to a zero sum, but building on the diversity of perspectives in order to have creative possibility. and to bring in the learning organization to suggest that these are capabilities that we need to build over the long term. When you get those three working, when you get a challenge, it's an opportunities to strengthen them. And that's where you get a hope loop going. So there's opportunity for us to do it, but we need to bring in some of those models of what it means to be a learning organization with a posture towards the future, what it means to think of every conversation we have about, say, sustainable futures is not about getting to a single answer, but is about strengthening our organizational resilience and resolve and our individual capabilities to do that.
Eloquent reminder of the importance of having people at the center, particularly when they find themselves in that triangle of the three horsemen that you mentioned.
For sure. And give another concrete example of it. A couple years ago, we did an evening on climate futures where we wanted to really embody some of the more positive possibilities, maybe more aligned with like a solar punk perspective. And Joseph, I know you think about that a lot. And we intentionally, so this is with students that were newer to this, right? And we know that our students, for the most part, for the last 10 years, are filled with climate anxiety and dread. And we wanted to make this joyful without making it Pollyanna or silly. And so we very intentionally invited guests that were doing interesting things in the intersection of design and futures, but not necessarily calling it that. And so one of my favorite examples was bringing in a wonderful climate activist, musician, artist named Madam Gandhi. And she came back to Stanford, Kiran Gandhi, to do a master's in music and computer science. And she already has a Harvard business degree behind us. And by the way, is a renowned DJ already. So this is already a very interesting Renaissance thinker in the world, futurist. And during her spring break at Stanford, she went down to Antarctica and as a musician decided to capture the sounds of icebergs melting in digital beats that she then made available to any musician or DJ around the planet in order to build empathy for a melting planet, to allow them to create music and be connected to what was going on within our globe. So we had her talking about the penguin synthesizer that she created, the organic beats, just as an example to help our students feel agentic in understanding what was happening on the frontiers of building sustainable futures in a way that gave them agency. Additionally, we had a woman who was talking about how we are now making clothing out of algae in order to walk around capturing carbon out of the air to give them a sense of where the future of fashion was going, where the future of sustainability and new markets may be going. Sure, it's not mainstream yet, but by really bringing it down in tangible forms and demonstrating what was on the horizon, got them excited to participate and to learn and be a part of these futures. So I'll pause there, but I just think it's so important for us to have these tangible examples, even if they are on the edge of what's possible, right? The preposterous futures, just to kind of give people something to start with.
Those are great examples of embodied foresight, feeling those signals of the future. Lassa, a quick one for you. How is AI influencing the criticality of human-centered foresight? The criticality of both stakeholders and those who are intervening, facilitating, helping encourage communities think differently about more sustainable futures. Okay, Lisa, so I emphasized the importance of humanity at the center of that. How is AI reconciling with that reality?
I think it's. I think that there's a thing on generative AI, right? It's if you're a lazy human being, that tends to be a major danger. In whereas if you're very curious, I think it's something that could really enhance the way you work with foresight, futures in general. And what do I mean by that? I think it's easy to jump to the conclusion that when we have some very powerful AI tools that you can create future narratives in, colors, beats, stories, and just expose that to people, and then you have done some great futures work. But we all know that it's the transition starts with the mind,
and the person.
how you feel about this. So if you're not engaging with that future, if you don't understand the dynamics, and if you don't feel that something needs to change, I mean, you have done nothing. So I think it's really about using these tools to I would say augment what we already do, and create something that resonates with people where they are and how they see the world. I think, again, jumping back to the language in organizations, that is, I mean, it's difficult to show the beats based on a melting iceberg to the
On a PowerPoint slide.
on a PowerPoint slide, and it's also dangerous to just start with exposing a leadership group from a European bank for these beats. They're not ready for that, because they are used to something else.
Right.
And I think it's actually wonderful what Lisa, you said, that we start with kids that are imaginative and creative, able to explore what is happening outside them. Then we spend 15 years in education taking all that out of them. And then we start working with them after their corporate learning and try to get that back again. I think that's a wonderful way of seeing this. And of course, I think our job is to move people a little bit in the right direction. And I think if you're too ambitious, you're not moving them at all. And then finding what is the next step, and how can you use, now back to your question, how can you use the AI tools for that, and expose them to something that gives a little bit more experience than a PowerPoint slide. I think that's definitely where we can use it, and that's also a language that they're also, accepting to a larger degree, I think, out there.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that you mentioned how AI can help, gently nudge in, as we've been talking about, a safe space towards a better future. In the book, and I give credit to Manuela Celli, my co-author, she really influenced the 2x2 that we have in the book. One axis being, how do we consume? And the other axis, how do we produce? How do we consume? Are we consuming as a collective or more individually? How are we producing? Are we producing more globally or more locally? And the reason we did that was to try to help frame, because sustainability is vast, particularly when we look at the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. It can be quite vast, quite complex. And I like what you were mentioning about using AI, and clearly this comes down to not a tool, not a method, but Lisa Kay, as you said, the ability, what we bring to these conversations to ideally move communities more towards areas that suit their culture. There are some cultures that are going to be more individual, not to mention Lisa Kay, any of them that you and I are connected with. There are cultures that are more collective. So helping communities align to what is the tendency for them to consume and produce. And in the book, and this is a question that's come up, we said that those communities that are more suited for collective grouping, consumption is one way to look at it, but it is really about how do we get together? How do we interact, is there more of a sense of a collective? And in that quadrant, where there is more tendency or more willingness for more local production, then clearly as designers, that's where circular design comes in, because we are able to tap into smaller supply chains. We are able to tap into more recycling and more regeneration. So that was, a way that we tried to identify where are you to be able to go, Lisa Kay, as you said earlier, to go where you are culturally and from a production perspective, to be able to then use tools like AI and others, whatever tools work, to help nudge them in the right direction. And we think that, that hopefully will help us all to be able to frame the conversations in a productive way and to create that sense of safety by empathizing deeply with what the cultural tendencies are and predilections are. I'm looking at the time, and we've got a couple of really interesting questions. One of them is about, and so I may have to turn this one to you, about the relativity of sustainability. And the reason I put that one out to you is for many, many years, relative futures, everyone's future has validity. Every future is a possible future. When we talk about the planet, we only have one planet. So how does the relativity of sustainability play out, knowing that we have passed the global temperature increase and we are on a path that is probably not going to be sustainable, literally and figuratively, in the near future?
It's who's the question to?
To yourself.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I couldn't. When you said you, I can't tell who you is. There's part of the answer is what you talk about in your book, right? Most groups are same, and you're suggesting part of the way out is to be different. What the philosopher Sarkar says, to become the exception. Everyone wants to be similar for safety, but the tension with futures is we actually try to develop processes, products, experiences where the possibility of being different comes out. And the difference, of course, creates the next wave in human evolution. So I think all of us understand we're at a bottleneck in human history. The bottlenecks have been here before in terms of failing civilizations, failing systems. This is a grander level, again, as you suggest, because there's one planet. So the bottleneck issue is how do you resolve it? And everyone goes in a different direction. And I think you're quite correct. Not every answer is correct. So foresight work starts with a very closed door. Then our goal really is to open up the doors, get people to be different, develop multiple pathways, find out who they are in the story. But once you've done that, then it's very clear, right? You want them to experience future A, burning of the planet, future B, the return of Gaia. And so once they have that experience, then you want to develop systems that support that. Right now, we have political structure that don't. So part of every future is relative. It's true in a certain phase, but then in the transformation phase, it's not the case. Certain futures are dead ends, and they will lead to dead ends. Now, when we ran the Sarkar game for One National Energy Commission, the Sarkar game is 4 groups. They try to create a successful civilization. We give them worker tools, warrior weapons, books for the intellectuals, and money for the capitalists. And they try to see, can they create a successful civilization? We have the 5th type of transformation power, what Sarkar calls the Sadvipra. Protects, honors others, works diligently, creates new ideas, and uses money not as congestion, but money keeps on flowing so people feel safe and trustworthy. So in this game with National Energy Commission, what was unique was 2-3 people just left the game. And they went on the side and created their own space. I said, this is unique. This is the group creating national energy policy. And afterward we said, so who were you? They said, well, we very much recognize all attempts to create policy and strategy within the framework of same would lead to whatever you say, more fossil fuel, more dead end policies. As Nikolai Kardashev says in the transition from type 0 to type 1, type 2, type 3 planet, type 0 planets explode because they can't resolve the contradiction between energy needs, which are infinite, and governance, which is tribal. Again, what Lisa Kay was saying. It's not about which party, but both have entered a tribal world. The way out of the tribal world is global governance with renewable energies. That leads us to a type 1 civilization. This group left the game and said, we recognize the old game won't work, so us three create our own safety. We have a warrior to protect us. The intellectuals giving us idea. We're getting capital. We're creating a new renewable energy scheme. And so then it was very clear, the old game we can't play in, it's reaching its dead end. So Toynbee talks about there's a creative minority who plays the role of transformation. Sorkin talks about the pendulum goes back and forth. And then it reaches a dead end. So we're at that dead end now. Our role as futurists is to create the new future, knowing full well if we're too far, people won't follow. And I think your book says, don't design same, design the exception. And I think when we run these workshops, we run futures labs, we run large projects. Again, the people who developed experiential futures, Dater, Boulding, William Irvin Thompson, Bob Jung in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were very clear. You have them experience being different, then they go back and they look for differences. Now, the risky part in our work is when you do that, we get changed. People get changed. So any leader, any country, any CEO said, if you do the Foresight Lab, Futures Lab, and now you don't follow up, your best people will leave or you'll get fired. And I've seen that over and over. So at the end of the workshop, they see the game. I said, what happened? Oh, we had to fire the CEO. We saw from the experience, this is no longer working. End of the workshop, the best tech people come up to me and said, if the head of the bank doesn't go ahead with this, we're leaving on Monday. And so you create the space, the difference comes out, it challenges the old system, the creative minority creates it, knowing full well the old structures are there, so you create a new space to enliven the new structures. As Laszlo said, you grow the new forest, and you keep on growing it till the time the old one declines. Hopefully peacefully, that's what we all want, peacefully with joy and abundance, but I think all of us recognize what's happened historically. Sometimes, as Gramsci said, we're in the interregnum. This is the time of monsters.
Yeah, indeed. And I think really resonates with, Lisa, what you said earlier about the responsibility that we have, particularly after engaging in those provocative or what we call speculative design-like conversations that encourage not same, but same difference. So there was a question about the Salka game, and we can follow up afterwards if there's a link that you have that we can share. I got one more question, and I'm sensitive to the time. As I put this to you, just a quick response. What are the best organizational teams to discuss, provoke conversations about sustainable futures? Is it strategy? Is it C-suite? Is it the board? Is it lower down? Is it I'll add customers, consumers, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a tough question, right? I don't think it's a matter of where in the organization they are. It's a matter of who they are. I think it's a matter of who's listening to them. And I think it's definitely a matter of the diversity in the group so they can feed each other and feed the conversation. And I mean, have that moment where they realize that they need to change their perspective and see things from a different way. And that needs to be, of course, facilitated, but that also needs to be some people that are open for that change.
Yeah, so that they've moved from unconscious leadership to conscious leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, those are the rare ones. Lisa, your final thoughts?
Yes to all. I mean, to me, we are at an exciting moment where we are getting more traction because of the urgency of this moment around sustainable futures, around other big problems like democracy, like many of these layered seemingly intractable problems, that we need disciplines of anticipation and imagination to be brought into strategic conversations across all stakeholder groups. And the idea that your book and so much of the work that our wonderful guests here have been putting out in the world are critical. And we really have to pay attention to how they are getting integrated into our organizations. I personally believe that we are going to see, I hope, a proliferation of a lot of new roles that we're not currently articulating, meaning like a strategic toggler. So Sohai was talking about the fact that people left the game that they were playing. Wonderful. Who is there going, fantastic, win, they left the game. That's actually what we were looking at. Now, let me follow up to figure out why they left the game, what was going on, and how do we integrate that as a learning component to the rest of our organizations? Because foresight and futures insights don't happen universally. So we're going to need a lot of people to be attuned to where things are happening across different levels in order to ensure that one person's aha is not another person's nightmare or an organization's nightmare. So all of this is to say, I believe this work is just beginning. I hope everyone on this call is excited to continue to practice our own practices. We have to continue to be aware of the opportunities at every step to both have those big visions and also shrink the change to what it means in the current moment. And I'll just share one more just very quick tangible example of a course I'm going to be teaching in the spring. It's called View from the Future. And essentially every week I'm bringing in a different practitioner that is doing work on the edge in order to help our students understand those anticipation practices of, quote, where the puck is going, but also what they can do to build their own skill set to be a part of the pioneering future. So I hope at every step, all of us are asking, these are big ideas. How do we bring them down in very, very tangible forms in order to ensure that we are bringing everybody along for these practices, that they are not feeling between those that feel comfortable in the space and those that feel that this is new to them and their amygdala hijacks and then they shut down. So we have a lot of work to do, but it starts with the kinds of gatherings, Joseph, that you did here today. And I know this is just the first in a series. And I want to personally end with where I started, which is gratitude for you, gratitude for everyone on this call and everyone listening to be a part of this new pathway forward.
Thank you, Lisa Kay. We do have a request for some of the links to some of the courses that you mentioned, Lassa as well. Also, Sohai, some of the CLA materials, and we'll make sure that we get that out to everyone. To echo, Lisa Kay, what you just said, this is not about what's in the book. It's about having these kinds of conversations. And it has been a real honor, as I said at the beginning, to have the opportunity to bring the three of you together to celebrate what I have been able to learn from our work over the years. And as Lisa Kay, you mentioned, in a couple of weeks, we will be having our second webinar, which is going to focus on part 2 of the book, Creating Sustainable Experiences. And we will be having a placemaker, Rosanna Vitella, Silvia Barbaro, who leads systemic design practice at the Politecnico di Milano, Nicholas Larson from the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies is actually going to be moderating. So I'll have the chance to take the seat of expert, or at least trying to figure all this out. And then a few weeks afterwards, we will have session 3, Leading the Transition. A lot of what we talked about today touches on the core topic of leadership, about where we are as practitioners and what do we bring into these conversations, but most importantly, who are we engaging with and how can we help facilitate the collective action to be able to take some of these better futures, whatever these better futures look like, to be able to then create sustainable experiences, products and services and processes and systems, and be able to have people who are the key stakeholders actually make them happen, to bring that better future to the present. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I do apologize for going over, but what a fantastic conversation. Again, I want to thank all of you, Lisa K, Sohai. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing everyone in a couple weeks for our session 2, Creating Sustainable Experiences. Until then, be well.